Summer, 1945. The sky over Munich still carried the smell of burning months after the bombs stopped falling. Rubble crunched underfoot like dry bones, and the air had the heavy taste of iron and ash. Anna Weber pressed her palm against the soot-stained wall of what had once been the hospital where she worked, her fingers leaving a faint white outline. The war had taken her husband, her father, and the last trace of softness from her voice, yet something in her still beat stubbornly, like a coal refusing to go out. Children darted barefoot through the wreckage, playing war with sticks and old helmets, their laughter bright against the hollow streets. Women queued silently at the ration station, dresses patched from curtains and tablecloths, cheeks hollowed by years of scarcity. The war had ended, yes, but what replaced it was a strange, gray silence. An occupied country where the future seemed as foreign as the language of the soldiers now patrolling the streets. Anna walked past the Marienplatz where a few market stalls had opened again, the smells of onion soup and bread crust drifting through the air like rumors. Somewhere an accordion played a tentative tune. The city felt like it was waking from a nightmare but not yet sure if it was safe to breathe. She carried a basket of boiled potatoes, still steaming, and clutched them as if they were gold. Every small act of survival had become sacred. It was near the Königsplatz that she first saw the Americans. Their olive-drab uniforms were clean, their boots shined, their posture loose in a way that looked almost careless compared to the rigid, brittle German soldiers she had known. They lounged by a jeep, laughing, tossing a baseball back and forth. One of them, tall, sun-browned, with hair the color of dry wheat, looked up and caught her staring. For a moment their eyes held, and she felt a strange warmth creep through her chest, a feeling she had not known since before the war. She looked away quickly, angry at herself for the sudden stirring. Captain James Whittaker had been in Europe for nearly 2 years and thought himself hardened to the ruins of war. But Munich was different. Here, the destruction was so thorough it felt personal, as though an entire civilization had been stripped down to its bones. He had grown up on a Kansas farm where the horizon was endless and the wheat rolled like an ocean in the wind. These stone streets felt claustrophobic, shadowed by broken buildings that leaned like drunks after a night of shelling. And yet, he found himself staring at the faces, especially the women's faces, trying to read in them whether they hated him, feared him, or perhaps, astonishingly, trusted him. Corporal Samuel Ortiz leaned against the jeep, peeling an orange. "They say we're not supposed to talk to them," he said, jerking his chin toward a group of women crossing the square. "Orders from Eisenhower. No handshakes, no smiles. No fraternizing." James caught the ball and shrugged. "You can't make people ghosts just because the war's over." Ortiz grinned. "Try telling the brass that." A girl no older than 19 passed by, her hair braided, her dress patched but clean. Liesel Koch, though none of the soldiers knew her name yet. She kept her chin high despite the hollowness under her eyes. Her family had lived on the edge of Schwabing, their home gutted by firebombs. She now shared a one-room flat with her mother and younger brother. She had sworn she would never smile at an American. But when Ortiz tossed her half the orange, she caught it, startled. For a moment, something like gratitude flickered across her face. She walked away quickly, but not before Ortiz muttered, "Guess she's human after all." Back in the hospital ruins, Anna unwrapped a photograph from her apron pocket. Her husband Hans had been killed at the Eastern Front in 1943, leaving her with no children and a grief that felt too large for her body. The photograph was creased, the ink beginning to fade, but she traced the shape of his face with her thumb. She had thought the end of the war would bring peace, but instead it had brought hunger and a gnawing loneliness. At night she dreamed of boots on cobblestones, of voices shouting in 2 languages, of a future that refused to take shape. That evening the Americans set up a makeshift dance in a requisitioned hall, its windows still boarded from the bombings. Someone had found a gramophone, and the music was scratchy but lively, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, tunes that had crossed the ocean with the soldiers. Anna did not go, but she heard about it the next morning from a neighbor who spoke of the strange sight. German women dancing with Americans, their skirts twirling in the candlelight, laughter ringing out as though the war had been a distant dream. By the week's end, the non-fraternization policy was already fraying. The GIs were lonely, far from home, and the women were starved for more than food. They longed for music, touch, some proof that life was not only a matter of endurance. James saw Anna again near the ration station, and this time he did not look away. "You speak English?" he asked gently, his German accent laughably clumsy. "A little," she said, wary, but she did not turn her back. "I am not supposed to talk to you," he said, and smiled as if sharing a secret. Something in Anna broke then, not with a shatter but with a quiet yielding, like ice giving way under spring thaw. They spoke only a few words before the line moved on, but when she walked away she realized she had been holding her breath the entire time. At night, Anna lit a candle and wrote in her journal, "Perhaps it is dangerous to speak to them. Perhaps it is foolish. But I am tired of being only a shadow in my own city." The city was changing little by little. Markets grew louder. The churches began to fill again. Somewhere, someone was painting over swastikas with whitewash, scrubbing away the symbols of a past everyone wanted to forget. Liesel found herself returning to the square more often, hoping for another tossed orange, another moment where the world felt almost normal. Ortiz noticed her from the jeep, gave her a two-fingered salute, and she blushed despite herself. Still, there were those who spat in the street when an American passed. Anna's neighbor warned her that women seen with GIs were sometimes called Ami Liebchen, and had their hair cut off as punishment. The shame of collaboration still hung heavy. But hunger is a patient negotiator, and hope is an even more persistent one. By the end of summer, the Americans had begun to organize dances more regularly, to hand out rations of coffee and chocolate, to teach the children baseball in the empty lots where buildings once stood. One evening, Anna found herself standing outside the hall, the music drifting through the broken windows. James appeared in the doorway, his cap in his hand, and offered her his arm without a word. Inside, the room smelled of wax and sweat, of wood warmed by too many feet. She stepped onto the floor, her shoes scuffing against the boards, and for the first time in years she felt young again. The music swelled, and the room seemed to brighten, as if the very city leaned closer to watch. Outside the ruins waited. The war's shadow still stretched over them. But that night, when the music stopped and the lights dimmed, Anna realized something had shifted. The silence no longer felt like an ending, it felt like a pause, the space between two notes. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of the street lamps, someone was watching, their fists tight at their sides, ready to make sure such meetings would not go unpunished. The first snow of autumn fell early that year, dusting Munich's ruins with a deceptive softness. The broken walls looked almost beautiful under the white, like monuments sculpted for some forgotten empire. Anna stood at the hospital's half-shattered window, watching soldiers throw snowballs at one another in the street, their laughter carrying on the cold air. She could not decide if it comforted her or stung. War had taught her that every sound meant something, every truck engine, every bootstep, but now the meanings were changing faster than she could keep up with. The Americans laughed too loudly, walked too freely, smiled too often. They were victors who behaved as though they wanted to share their victory, which somehow felt more disarming than rage would have been. The orders posted across the city were clear. No contact between German civilians and Allied soldiers. Eisenhower himself had issued the command in May. No handshakes, no casual talk, no friendship, and certainly no romance. The punishment could be severe, both for soldiers and for civilians accused of fraternizing. Yet rules are brittle things when pressed against hunger, loneliness, and youth. By October, the cracks in the policy showed everywhere. Children lingered near checkpoints to beg for gum and chocolate. Women paused to trade eggs for soap, coffee, or cigarettes. Anna heard rumors of girls who had been dragged into the square by neighbors and shorn bald as punishment for spending nights with Americans. And still the meetings happened. James knew the order by heart. It was drilled into him during briefings, written on every bulletin board, enforced by officers with sharp eyes. And yet, every time he saw Anna in the ration line, the rule seemed to dissolve like sugar in tea. He found excuses to linger in the square, pretending to inspect vehicles or read reports. She would nod politely, never smiling too broadly, but her eyes had grown softer since that first meeting. "Careful, Captain," Ortiz said one afternoon, his breath fogging in the air. "You're getting that look. The one guys get right before they do something that lands them on a train back to Le Havre." James threw him a sideways glance. "Maybe the policy is wrong." Ortiz laughed. "Maybe. But the MPs don't care if you're a romantic philosopher. They'll still bust you." That night, there was another dance in the hall, and Anna stood outside for a long time before going in. She told herself she was only curious about the music, about the way the brass instruments filled the room with a golden liquid sound that seemed to drip into the cracks of the building. Inside, the women stood on one side, the soldiers on the other, both groups hesitant, the air tense with an energy that felt almost like the minutes before a battle. Then someone crossed the space, a soldier offering his hand to a girl in a patched dress, and suddenly the dance floor came alive. Anna stayed near the wall, clutching her shawl. When James found her, he didn't speak at first. He simply extended his hand, palm open. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. The dance was awkward. She had not danced since her wedding, and his steps were too large, his boots too heavy, but by the second song she had begun to laugh quietly. It startled her, the sound of it, as though it belonged to another woman entirely. She felt the eyes of neighbors on her back, the weight of their judgment, but for the length of that song she did not care. Across the room, Liesel danced with Ortiz. She was lighter on her feet, her youth giving her a kind of quicksilver grace. Ortiz cracked jokes in broken German, and she tried to keep from laughing but failed, covering her mouth with her hand. When the song ended, he offered her a chocolate bar, and she tucked it into her pocket with a nod, as if accepting a treaty. After the dance, Anna walked home through the snow, her cheeks burning with cold and something else. At her door, she found her neighbor Frau Becker waiting. "You should be careful," Frau Becker said, her voice sharp as frost. "People are watching. They say the Americans are not here to love us. They are here to humiliate us." Anna held her gaze. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but I am tired of being only a ghost." Through November the dances grew bolder, the smiles warmer. James found ways to bring small gifts: a tin of coffee, a handful of sugar cubes, a pair of stockings scrounged from army supplies. Anna accepted them with quiet dignity, though she saved them for her neighbors as often as for herself. To her surprise, she found herself telling him things she had not told anyone since Hans's death. About the nights she worked in the hospital during the bombings, about the screaming of the wounded, about the smell of burned flesh that clung to her hair no matter how often she washed it. One night, they sat on the steps of a ruined church, the city quiet around them. "You don't have to tell me these things," James said gently. "If I don't tell them to someone," Anna replied, "I think they will eat me from the inside." Snowflakes settled on her dark hair, and James resisted the urge to brush them away. He felt something shift in his chest, something that had been locked tight since Anzio, since he had seen friends die under shellfire. But outside their small circle of warmth, resentment was brewing. A group of former Wehrmacht soldiers, now demobilized and restless, had begun to gather near the rail station, muttering about German honor and American occupation. One evening as Anna walked home, she heard footsteps behind her and quickened her pace. "You think we don't see you?" a man's voice hissed from the shadows. "You dance for them like a whore while our dead lie in the ground." Anna kept walking, her heart thudding, until she reached her door. She locked it and stood in the dark, listening until the footsteps faded. The next day she said nothing to James, but he saw the bruise forming on her wrist where the man had grabbed her. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since he had arrived in Munich, he felt a flare of real anger, not at the enemy he had fought, but at the injustice still coiled like a snake in the ruins. Ortiz warned him again. "Captain, you're walking a thin line. They catch you sneaking out to meet her, you'll lose your commission." "Let them try," James said quietly. "Some things are worth it." Winter deepened, and with it came a strange sense of defiance. More women attended the dances, more soldiers risked their stripes for a few hours of warmth and laughter. The MPs raided one gathering in late December, hauling 3 soldiers out into the snow, but the next night another dance was organized. It was as if the city itself was conspiring to be alive again. Liesel's younger brother began to follow her secretly, suspicious of where she went. One night he confronted her, shouting that she was betraying their father's memory. Liesel slapped him, then collapsed into tears, clutching Ortiz's chocolate like a talisman. Anna too felt the growing pressure. One Sunday morning, Frau Becker refused to sit beside her in church. The message was clear: she had crossed a line invisible but unforgivable. Still, when James asked if she would meet him again, she did not say no. One night in January, the dance hall filled with more people than ever before, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of wet wool. James and Anna danced until her feet ached, and when the last song ended, he did something reckless. He kissed her, right there in the open where anyone could see. The room went very quiet. Someone coughed. Somewhere a chair scraped the floor. And then, slowly, the music started again, as though the city itself had decided to keep the secret. Outside, the snow fell harder. In the distance, a figure stood at the corner, watching, unmoving. The night swallowed him before Anna could be sure of his face, but the chill that ran through her had nothing to do with the cold WWII spring of 1946. The air in Munich smelled different, less of smoke, more of wet earth and something like hope. The Americans had eased their restrictions on fraternization, though official permission came too late to matter. Love, or something like it, had already taken root in the ruins. Weddings began to appear like wildflowers sprouting through the cracks of a bombed street. The first ceremonies were quiet, almost secret affairs: 2 witnesses, a priest, a pair of borrowed rings, but soon they grew bolder, filling churches with music and laughter that felt like defiance. Anna sat in the back pew of a small church in Schwabing, her hands clasped in her lap, watching a girl in a parachute silk dress say her vows to a soldier barely old enough to shave. The dress had been sewn from a real American parachute, its panels cut and stitched with care, the seams holding a strange poetry. An object meant for war transformed into a garment for peace. Anna felt something catch in her chest as the girl smiled shyly at her new husband. She glanced at James, who stood near the door, cap in hand, and saw that his eyes were fixed not on the bride but on her. The paperwork was another battle entirely. To marry a German woman, an American soldier needed permission from his commanding officer, then background checks to ensure she had no Nazi affiliations, no criminal record, no political contamination. The process could take months, sometimes longer. Yet the couples endured it, lining up at military offices with stacks of documents, affidavits, and photographs. Some were rejected, others delayed until the soldiers' deployments ended. Still they came back, stubborn and determined. James filled out his own request for permission, his handwriting careful and deliberate. He wrote Anna's name with a sense of finality that startled him. When he told her, she said nothing for a long time, her face unreadable. "Are you certain?" she asked at last. "Your family will not approve. My neighbors already whisper." "I am certain," he said simply. "If the army sends me home without you, I'll come back." The War Bride Act had just been passed in the United States, allowing foreign-born wives of American servicemen to immigrate without quota restrictions. For thousands of women, it was the first real chance to leave behind the rubble and hunger and start over. Liesel heard the news in the square and ran to tell Ortiz, breathless with excitement. "It means you can take me with you," she said, her cheeks flushed. "Not just talk about it, actually do it." Ortiz laughed and pulled her into his arms. "Then let's start the paperwork, Fräulein Koch." The waiting was the hardest part. James was sent to another post for 6 weeks, and Anna returned to her lonely apartment, the absence of his presence gnawing at her more sharply than she expected. She spent her days at the hospital, cleaning wards that would never be used again, as if scrubbing away the past would make the future arrive faster. At night she sat by the window and wrote in her journal, the candlelight casting long shadows on the wall. "The city feels emptier without him," she wrote. "Perhaps it is dangerous to depend on someone who can be sent away at any moment. And yet, when I imagine him gone forever, the air feels too thin to breathe." When James returned, he carried good news. Their request had been approved. The wedding would be scheduled for early summer. Anna wept, quietly and without shame, as he held her in the square under a sky just beginning to turn blue with twilight. The ceremony took place in the same church she had sat in months before, watching another couple's vows. This time she wore her own parachute silk dress, stitched by Liesel's mother, who wept as she helped fasten the buttons. The church was full. Neighbors, soldiers, children who had come just for the music. Someone found sugar to make a small cake. Someone else brought flowers from a garden no longer mined for bombs. When James kissed her, the bells rang and Anna felt as though the entire city had drawn a deep breath. But marriage was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a new kind of strangeness. The first weeks were filled with small collisions, language mishaps, cultural differences, habits learned in separate worlds. James salted his food too heavily, made coffee so weak Anna said she could see the bottom of the cup. She startled when he touched her shoulder unexpectedly, a reflex from years of war. One night, they attended a gathering at the officers' club, and Anna was introduced to other war brides, French, Belgian, Dutch. They shared stories of endless queues for documents, of suspicious neighbors, of the first awkward dinners with American families who looked at them as if they were ghosts from the battlefield. Some of the women had already left for the States and wrote back about life across the ocean. Long train rides, big kitchens, sidewalks so clean they gleamed. Anna began to imagine it, the Great Crossing. She thought of Kansas, of the wheat fields James described, of the horizon so wide it might swallow her. She thought of starting over in a place where no one knew her as the widow who survived when others did not. And yet the idea frightened her. Leaving meant abandoning the last traces of her past. The graves, the streets, the ruins that had shaped her. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with rumors of more marriages. By late 1946, tens of thousands of German women had wed American soldiers, a number that grew so quickly it startled both governments. Newspapers printed editorials, some condemning the unions, others celebrating them as proof that reconciliation was possible. Not everyone approved. One morning Anna found the word Verräterin, traitor, scrawled on her door in charcoal. James scrubbed it away, but the mark remained faintly visible as though burned into the wood. "They will see eventually," he told her, his voice firm. "This isn't betrayal. It's survival. Yet even he could not deny the tension in the air. Fights broke out occasionally between soldiers and German men. A neighbor refused to sell Anna eggs, muttering that she had sold her honor for coffee. She endured it silently, but when James found out, his anger was barely contained. "I didn't fight through 2 years of war to have you shamed for dancing with me," he said, his voice sharp. She touched his cheek gently. "Then do not fight now. Let them talk. The city will heal, but it will take time." The healing was slow but visible. Streets were cleared, shops reopened, children went back to school. At the next dance, there were more German civilians than ever before, and the music was louder, the laughter freer. Liesel twirled across the floor with Ortiz, her hair shining under the lights, and Anna felt a sudden, fierce hope that perhaps the future would be less cruel than the past. The spring thaw melted the last of the snow, and the streets turned to mud. Paperwork for emigration piled up on Anna's table, each form a step closer to leaving everything behind. She and James spent evenings planning the journey, the ship from Bremerhaven, the train from New York to Kansas, the small house they would rent until they saved enough for land. One evening, as they sat together, James produced a photograph of his family. "They don't know about you yet," he admitted. "But they will. My mother will write you letters once you arrive. She'll teach you how to make cornbread." Anna smiled faintly. "And if she hates me?" "She won't," he said, but there was a shadow in his voice that made her wonder. Liesel received word that her own paperwork had been approved, and she raced to Anna's apartment to share the news. The two women sat together that night, talking about what they would pack, what they would leave behind. Liesel confessed that she had never seen the ocean, and Anna admitted that she had never imagined living anywhere but Bavaria. "You will like America," Liesel said. "Ortiz says everything is big there. Big houses, big cars, big sandwiches. Even the sky is bigger." Anna did not answer right away. She stared out the window at the narrow street, the crooked lamppost, the church spire that still stood despite everything. She wondered if the sky could really be bigger anywhere else, or if it was only that she had been looking down for too long. As summer approached, the day of departure drew near. The city seemed to sense it. Neighbors who had once whispered now came to say quiet goodbyes, pressing small gifts into Anna's hands. An embroidered handkerchief, a loaf of bread, a sprig of lavender wrapped in paper. Even Frau Becker, stern and silent, nodded at her in the street, as if conceding that perhaps love was not treachery after all. On the morning of their departure, Anna stood on the platform with her suitcase, the air filled with the hiss of steam and the smell of coal smoke. James stood beside her, his hand firm on her shoulder. Liesel and Ortiz were there too, grinning nervously, their papers clutched like passports to another world. When the train pulled in, Anna felt her throat tighten. The whistle wailed, long and low, like a farewell to the city that had been her prison and her cradle. She climbed aboard, turning back only once to see the spire of the church framed against the sky. As the train pulled away, she pressed her forehead to the glass. The city receded, shrinking until it was only a smear of gray on the horizon. And yet, just before it vanished entirely, she saw a figure standing alone by the tracks, watching. The same man who had followed her once before. His face was unreadable, but his presence was unmistakable, a reminder that some ghosts were boarding this journey with her, whether she liked it or not. The ship loomed like a steel cathedral at the harbor in Bremerhaven, its gangway stretching upward as if daring the passengers to climb into a new life. The air smelled of salt and coal smoke, the cries of gulls mixing with the hiss of steam. Anna gripped her small suitcase, the leather worn smooth by her hands, and felt her stomach flutter. This was no longer a plan or a hope. This was departure. Beside her, James adjusted his duffel bag, his easy stance belying the gravity of the moment. The deck thrummed underfoot as they boarded, and the ship's horn let out a sound so deep it seemed to shake the bones of the earth. Anna turned once, searching the crowd left behind on the pier. Neighbors, priests, even Frau Becker who stood stiffly with folded arms. They were receding figures now, already fading into memory. When the ship pulled away, the water churned white, and the whole harbor seemed to tilt. Anna pressed her gloved hand to the railing, watching Germany grow small. The crossing was long and restless. The Atlantic stretched gray and endless in every direction, the waves swelling like the backs of sleeping giants. The air was sharp with salt and the occasional whiff of diesel, and the sound of the engines became a kind of constant heartbeat. Anna spent hours on deck, her hair whipping around her face, her thoughts tumbling just as wildly. Nights were filled with the creak of the ship and the murmur of other passengers whispering about what awaited them. One evening, under a sky pricked with stars, James found her by the railing. "Thinking about what's ahead?" he asked. "And what's behind," she admitted. It feels like I'm being stretched between two worlds. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, warm against the chill. We'll make a new one, he said simply. When the Statue of Liberty came into view days later, the deck erupted in cheers. Anna's breath caught. She had seen photographs of the statue, but seeing it rise from the mist felt like stepping into a myth. New York appeared next, towering, impossible, glittering with windows that reflected the morning sun like a field of mirrors. The smell of the harbor was foreign, oil, brine, roasting chestnuts from vendors on the docks. The train ride west was a blur of landscapes that seemed to grow wider with each mile. Smokestacks and tenements gave way to green fields, then vast plains where the sky stretched so wide it made Anna dizzy. She pressed her face to the glass like a child, marveling at barns painted red, rivers flashing silver under bridges, the rhythm of the train clattering like a drumbeat announcing their arrival. Kansas was unlike anything she had imagined, flat, golden, endless. When they stepped off the train, the wind rolled across the fields carrying the smell of earth and sun-warmed grain. James's mother was there to meet them, her hands rough from farm work, her eyes cautious but kind. The first weeks were a whirlwind. The house was small but sturdy, with a porch that looked out over the fields. Anna learned to measure her days by the rhythm of the farm. The lowing of cattle at dawn, the creak of the windmill, the rustle of corn in the evening breeze. She marveled at the abundance, loaves of bread stacked in the kitchen, milk in glass bottles, meat at every meal. It felt indecent at first, like feasting in a cathedral, but slowly she let herself eat without guilt. Still, not everything was easy. The neighbors stared, curious and sometimes suspicious. Some whispered the word Nazi under their breath, as though it were stamped on her forehead. She could not yet speak enough English to defend herself, and the shame of it burned. James defended her when he heard such talk, but the sting lingered. At night, when the crickets sang, Anna would sit on the porch with a kerosene lamp and write to Liesel, who was still waiting for her papers. The sky here is so wide it feels as though I could drown in it, she wrote. Sometimes it is beautiful. Sometimes it frightens me. Slowly the land began to claim her. She planted flowers near the porch, learned to bake cornbread with James's mother, discovered the peculiar sweetness of American iced tea. She laughed more, the sound growing freer, less cautious. And James, too, seemed to breathe easier, as if the war were finally loosening its grip on him. But the past was not so easily left behind. Some nights Anna woke from dreams of air raid sirens, heart pounding, the darkness around her too quiet. She would slip outside barefoot and stand under the stars until the fear ebbed. One night she found James already out there, staring into the sky. I still hear them sometimes, he confessed. The shells, the screams. It's like they live in my bones. She took his hand. Then we will stand here together until they go quiet. By autumn. Letters from Germany arrived with news of shortages, protests, trials of former officers. Liesel wrote that she and Ortiz had been approved and would sail before winter. Anna read the letter aloud on the porch and James grinned. About time, he said. The day the letter arrived, Anna baked a cake, something she had not done since before the war, and brought it to the neighbors. It was a small gesture, but something shifted after that. Invitations followed, for church suppers, for barn dances, and slowly the wary distance between her and the town began to shrink. One evening, as the sun sank over the fields and painted the sky in copper and rose, James found her standing barefoot in the dirt, watching the light change. Do you feel like you belong yet? He asked quietly. She thought for a long moment. Sometimes, she said. And sometimes I feel as though I am still on that ship, halfway between two worlds. James wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her hair. Then we'll keep building until there is only one world, ours. It should have been enough. The house, the land, the growing sense of acceptance. But one night, just as the harvest moon rose, a letter arrived without a return name. Inside was a single scrap of paper, scrawled in German, "Where Vergessen nicht. We do not forget." Anna read it twice, her hands trembling. The fields outside lay quiet, but for the first time since she'd crossed the ocean, she felt the old fear coil again in her chest. Someone, somewhere, still carried the past like a blade. The letter sat on the kitchen table for 3 days, its presence a silent shadow in the room. Anna could not bring herself to throw it away, though James urged her to. We do not forget. The words seemed to whisper from the folded paper at night, just as the crickets began their song. It was not just a threat. It was a reminder that the past still claimed her, that someone out there believed she had no right to happiness. The harvest came, golden and abundant, the fields waving like oceans beneath the sun. Anna worked beside James, her hands stained with earth, her muscles aching in a way that felt honest. Each basket of grain felt like an offering to the future. Yet the unease persisted. She began to glance over her shoulder when walking to town, her ears sharp for the sound of a car pulling too close, a voice calling her name. Liesel arrived in late November, stepping off the train with her hair tucked under a kerchief and Ortiz at her side. The reunion was fierce and joyful. They celebrated with food, music, and even dancing in the small farmhouse kitchen, the floor shaking beneath their feet. For a while, the laughter banished the letter's shadow. But when Anna lay awake that night listening to the wind howl against the windows, the memory of the words returned, sharp as a knife. Winter closed in hard. Snow piled against the porch, turning the world white and still. In the silence of those nights, James told her stories of his boyhood, the time he'd been caught in a summer storm, the way the wheat bent under the wind like a living thing. She told him of the first night she worked in the hospital during the bombing raids, how she'd carried a boy no older than her brother through a hall filled with smoke and plaster dust. They spoke of the war like two surgeons describing a wound, careful not to flinch, careful not to reopen what had already scarred. It was in February that the threat became more than words. A package arrived with no return address. Inside lay a piece of parachute silk, shredded into ribbons. Anna stared at it, her stomach hollow. James crumpled it in his fist and cursed under his breath. "They know," Anna said softly. "They know we married. They mean to remind me." "Then let them," James replied, his voice hard. "We won the war, Anna. They can't touch us here." But the next morning, tire tracks appeared in the snow leading up to their gate. No one came to the door, but the feeling of being watched became a presence she could not ignore. When spring came, it felt like a liberation. The snow melted, revealing the earth dark and fertile. Anna planted flowers again, kneeling in the dirt with her skirts gathered. The first shoots of green felt like a defiance of the past, each stem a refusal to be cowed. Still, she kept the shredded silk in a drawer, as if to remind herself that happiness could not be taken for granted. One evening, near dusk, a car slowed at the end of the lane. Anna froze on the porch steps. James stepped outside, his rifle casually slung over his shoulder, and stared until the car rolled away into the twilight. "Whoever it is, they're cowards," he said. "They won't face me." But that night Anna dreamed of Munich, of rubble-strewn streets and the sound of boots behind her. She woke with tears on her face and found James already awake, holding her hand in the dark. "We've come too far to let them steal this from us," he said. "They want us afraid. Don't give them what they want." Summer returned, and with it a kind of peace. The wheat grew tall, gold under the relentless sun, the fields humming with cicadas. One Sunday the town held a barn dance, and Anna wore her wedding dress, its parachute silk now soft from many washings. She stepped onto the floor, her heart steady. When James took her hand, the music swelled and the room seemed to glow. It was then that she saw him, the man from Munich, the shadow at the station, standing in the doorway. Her breath caught. He was older now, leaner, dressed like any farmer, but his eyes were the same, sharp and watchful. James saw her stiffen and followed her gaze. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed the floor and faced the man. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, the music still playing, the dancers oblivious. Then the man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, turned, and walked back into the night. Anna felt her knees weaken. James returned to her side, his expression unreadable, and led her back into the dance. Her heart pounded, not with fear but with something that felt almost like release. When the music ended, they stepped outside into the cool night air. Fireflies sparked in the grass, and the sky was heavy with stars. "He let us go," Anna whispered. "No," James said quietly, pulling her close. "We let him go." For a long moment they stood there, the barn glowing behind them, the fields stretching endless into the dark. The war was still in them, would always be in them, but it no longer owned them. Years later, when their children asked about the dress, Anna would take it from the trunk, the silk yellowed but still whole, and tell them how it had once been a parachute, how it had carried her not from a plane but from one life into another. On that summer night, though, she simply held James's hand and listened to the wind moving through the wheat, sounding almost like applause. Somewhere, far away, the past was still whispering, but here on this quiet farm, the future had begun to sing.